What's up, boys and girls? Pete Clark here, and today we're going to be bringing you a live play video at 200 zoom. Going to be two tabling and just picking the best bits to show on this video. Let's get into it. Essentially, in this spot, when a weaker player opens, you just always want to 3-bet a hand this good. I would tend to 3-bet more hands than normal here and also linearize my 3-bet range. This is a parallel spot on the other table where it's actually a mix. I'm going to 3-bet this one about half the time. I think the 10-9 makes a very good 3-bet bluff. The funny thing is here that a lot of less experienced players would 3-bet 10-9 suited before 3-betting 10-9 off. That's actually backwards. In the big blind, you want to have a really polarized 3-bet range. If you want to have a look at what that is, you can check out the solved ranges available on carrotcorner.com. You can pick these up for the rake structure that you play, and they will give you a very good blueprint as to what to do as a default strategy, but do deviate from them wherever you can. There's lots of exploits you can make pre-flop, as I said in my last video, the 5 lost poker arcs. We talked about that, right? So we're doing some pre-flop exploits. So really similar theme as before, we would have 3-bet this one some of the time and called the rest of the time had this player not 3-bet first. Really break even kind of open here. Going to make it every single time because we have button tagged as a recreational player. What that's going to do is decrease the 3-bet frequency we see from this player. As you can see, we face a cold call here, which is a lot better than facing a 3-bet for Queen 6. And we're going to begin by checking this flop. The reason we're going to do this is that I believe a recreational player will make a few more mistakes here against the check. What happens when they quickly check back though is that their bluff frequency on the turn goes quite far down. It's unlikely they're going to bet now with hands like King Jack or King 10 if they didn't bet flop, and if the chances of them betting some underpair here are really low. So I think what we want to do here is just pick a bet size that is good against 9x, pocket 10s, jacks, 8s, that sort of thing, turn flush draws, and just play against that region. Classically, you would check again with that hand in GTO at some frequency. I don't think it's right when you face a snap check from a recreational. I think you want to adjust there. So in this hand, we open ace-7 under the gun, 3-3-5. It's a very bad board for range, unless our opponent is actually building an aggressive donk bet strategy, which will weaken his checking range. If they're not donk betting, these situations are quite bad for us, and we can actually check back a lot of combos, given that we have a massive disadvantage with respect to the 3x here. The 5x, the straight draw type hands, we're just not going to be doing too well. Facing overbet here, it's kind of interesting. I think our ace high does want to mix some call, but I think ace 7 is going to be one of the ace-x that blocks the most bluffs in this particular configuration, because people are more likely to lead, like, I guess 8-7, 7-6, 7-4 suited here, straight draw hands and low showdown value hands than they are to lead bigger ones. So I don't think this is one of the ace-x I'm going to choose to call, just based on how I think humans construct their leading range on that turn. Ace king of clubs here, going to go ahead and 3-bet to 12x. 12 big blinds, I should say, not 12x, that'd be a little bit much. Just under 6x though. Nice big sizing when we are in the big blind generally, with a more polarized range. I've talked about this before on videos. And ace king suited is going to be a pure jam against the 4-bet. Villain calls, we go to a flop of jack jack 8. This is a relatively high EV board for my range. I'm going to actually play a big bet strategy here. Ace king of clubs has fairly nutted pair draw, and it does block both ace jack and king jack suited, which are the more common variants of the broadways the villain has here. He doesn't have king jack off, right? So we're going to mix this one a bit more than, well, around global. I'm going to say about 75% of the time for betting this one, and we're going to use our big sizing. Our global frequency here, meaning how often we bet our overall range, is going to be something like, I would imagine like 70%, 65%, something like that. The reason I'm using a big bet here on the flop is that on the jack jack 8 board in a 3-bet pot, the jack isn't as neutralizing to the nut advantage. Villain doesn't have as many trips combos, and so our overpairs are still doing pretty well. The ace turn is really good for range here, and we can definitely deploy a strategy of betting small really often on this card. Our opponent's range now is going to be very polarized between stuff like the nut flush draw with an ace, some other flush draw and jack x, and then very bad hands like 9s and things like that. The queen of diamonds lands in the river, and our hand is placed squarely in the tier 4 kind of band of our range. This is a spot where we can't really value bet anymore, we can't really bluff, we just have to check. And in this spot, villain has to be very creative to reach a good bluffing frequency. It's very hard for him to turn enough stuff into bluffs here without starting to shove like ace 10 of hearts as a bluff or something like that. It's very hard to see on this node where the bluffs come from. I think there's a lot of boats, there are flushes, there are plenty of value hands. This is one of the most under bluffed spots in the game tree, and a very standard fold. Ace 10 here, we're going to be mixing between 3-betting and calling. I'm going to mix this one as a 3-bet, let's say just 25% of the time. Calling this time, as per the RNG, which you guys cannot see. It was a 93, in case you're curious, in case you care about that kind of thing. And on the flop here, we can play a small raise strategy here with this hand. I'm only going to raise this a low frequency about a quarter of the time. The rest of the time I'm going to call. As long as we keep our flop raise small enough, we can include this hand in our raising range. And I do like to often pose the question to villain of making small raises just to see how they're going to handle that spot. It's not such a well documented situation to face a small like 3x flop raise there. Easy call on the turn, ace of clubs here being good for the most part because we're blocking chops that are redrawing against us. We don't actually want them to be in his range, like ace 5 of clubs here would just be free rolling us basically with the redraw. And yeah, interesting spot. We do block 10-8 of spades here. This run out's a little bit messy, like some straight draws get there, some other stuff misses. We do unblock hearts and low clubs as well. I suspect with this blocker to the 8 that this hand is probably a call. Okay, I might check that one out. I'm not sure whether it's pure or whether there's some mixing going on there. So here we are in PioSOLVER. Let's take a look at this hand and see if this river call is okay. I like to line check stuff sometimes when I'm a little bit unsure. I'll again try and talk through my out of game thoughts as I go. I think it's well worth doing this so that you're not just jumping straight from the hand into looking at the answer of the solver and seeking some sort of reassurance. That's always the temptation, but we want to analyze as we go. So I've told villain to just bet everything on this board, mainly because I think that's what people are doing. I've also given me the option to small raise here. As you can see, ace-10 offsuit is generally a mix. It's going to be raised. I think in game I said I'd be raising at about 25% frequency, and it really depends what suit you have. It raises a bit more often with certain hands than others, especially when it's unblocking clubs. It wants to get greedier for value so it can get called by clubs. There's a few suit things going on here, but not really a big deal. I think we can safely say that both raising and calling with this hand are fine. It's always good to look at the EV here just to make sure that they line up mostly. Most of the time these optional hands will be indifferent to raise, and we just want to make sure that is the case, which it is. We do decide to simply call this time. The jack of clubs comes down on the turn, bringing the double flush draw. The solver thinks you can do some overbetting here. I don't actually think the villain is likely to be deploying an overbet strategy on a paired board. A lot of people would just use the big bet. So what I would do at this point is actually do something called a subtree, which works as follows. We basically go tree and we say create subtree configuration at the top here. This is going to bring up a new window, and what we're going to do in this window is basically just restrict our sizing to 0 because we're never leading the turn. This will take the turn ranges. We're just going to make sure that villain can only bet 75% POC here. We just resolve this. It takes no time at all because you're basically solving a baby tree. It's a very small tree. And as you can see, it's solved. So we go back into the browser and we look at this from the turn onwards. So this is meant to be his turn strategy. Value betting all sorts of ace-x plus, and as you can see, these club hands are betting at higher frequency than the others because they are kind of free rolling our bluff catches like ace-10 at this point. So he bets here, and our ace-10 offsuit is another completely standard call, as we did. Not much we can really say about that. And we head on over to the river, which was the 9 of diamonds. So the 9 of diamonds in general is going to be a very good card for our opponent's range, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that by bringing up something called the heat map. This is what we call I call it a heat map. Pio calls it a hotness map. I'm not sure its English is quite up to par there. What this map does is basically tell us what river cards are really good for him, which river cards are really good for us. So if we look at the in position EV here, we'll be able to see which river cards in position is supposed to like. That's him. So as we can see, ones that complete the straight, because he's going to be barreling turn with a lot of gut shots and stuff that we can't call with, so he's going to have a lot of what we would say is a unique hand in his range here, like a queen or something like that, or a 10. He's going to hit these cards very often. These cards are going to be incredibly good for villain. On the other hand, when the turn is a brick or something like an ace that just makes all of our ace-x chop with all of his better ace-x or formerly better ace-x, or a jack because we have the second pair and he doesn't really after we call turn and he bets turn, or an 8, which I guess just makes it really hard for him to ever outkick us with an 8, makes it with an ace, makes it impossible, and just improves the strength of our showdown value. These are the river cards our range really wants to see. The ones it doesn't want to see are straight completing cards like a 9, a 10, a queen. On these straight completing cards, some of his straight draws get there and some of them don't, so I think my 10 kicker is going to be a somewhat neutral blocker. The reason I decided to call with this hand is that it basically blocks the 8x that he can be value betting here by having the 10 of spades. Note that if I had the 10 of clubs or hearts, not only would I possibly block busted flush draw bluffs here, but should follow through at some frequency on very good rivers for imposition's range, but I would also be failing to block 8x. Let's take a look at what the solver thinks of my call. So the first thing I've done here, guys, is I've actually limited villain's bet sizing to just one sizing. I've gone in here and done a subtree where I've forced him to only bet 75% on the river. The reason I've made him bet that size is that when you let the solver overbet here, it practically puts all of its hands into an overbet range because it has such a big nut advantage on this node. and stops using b75. Therefore, the b75 range it uses is really bizarre, and we don't really want to work with that, because what it does is it removes us from reality. And this basically illustrates one of the problems of using solvers to try to see how you played. You're actually oftentimes looking at a sim that's totally different. You're looking at a simulation of the game that's just not what's happening. So we've kind of assumed that this is villain's only bet size here. That's not perfect either, but I think it's better than assuming that he has all these bigger bets and just crafts a really weird b75 range. So we can see that our ace 10 here is supposed to basically pure frequency call. Interestingly enough, the 10 of spades doesn't seem to be as good as I thought it was. I think that's because villain will prefer to follow through on the river with the 10 of spades as a bluff with something like king 10, more so than he will want to follow through with a busted flush draw like the 10 of hearts. So I think that's why it doesn't like that as much. But when we look at the EV, which we should always do here, at the bottom right you can now see the EV of call. It's basically 0. This is a break-even hand. The other ace 10 are mostly winning. I think the more interesting point here is how easy or difficult will it be for villain to bluff often enough here or avoid overbluffing here. So let's take a look at his betting range. The value bets are really straightforward. He's meant to value bet here with ace queen plus. Ace queen, I think some people will miss this. Ace queen, ace jack. Ace jack will value bet, sorry, but ace queen, ace king. I can see people checking back sometimes with these hands, just getting like a little bit freaked out here, not quite valuing the hand highly enough, given that I don't really have a lot of straights that call this turn. You don't want to get too put off here in villain shoes by the 9 river. It's not really hitting my range in a major way. So I think the value bets are quite easy to find, although someone might miss some of these, which would be good for us calling, right? If someone misses value bets, I'm not saying villain does this, but if somebody does, then our EV goes up for calling. When it comes to bluffs, they're quite intuitive as well. Things like king 10 are meant to follow through all the time unless they're hearts. Things like king 10 offsuit, same thing, really frequent bluffs. More bluffs come from this region down here, things like just busted queen high. These are really mandatory. These are great bluffs. They tend to block my folding range more heavily. I'm not playing a lot of hands with a 4 in it in the first place, so a 4 isn't really what I'm folding. What I'm folding the most here is stuff like queen jack, king jack, jack 10. So I guess he wants to, having the 4 is kind of a safe card to bluff with. I think villain should just be bluffing a lot here, because this is a river card that's really good for his range. One thing he shouldn't bluff with though is busted king high. These hands are largely giving up, although king deuce and king 3 do start betting when they don't have the busted flush draw. But yeah, I think it's quite unclear to me whether this spot is overbluffed or underbluffed. I could see people possibly underbluffing a little bit here based on what I know about these sorts of textures. The 9 is a bit of a dicey texture that people don't realize is so good for them, and sometimes don't realize that they need to bluff as often as this card actually requires them to. Really good spot for button, he has to bluff a lot. But I think, in general, this spot's not going to be overbluffed or anything like that. However, there are some value hands in here that I think people could miss as well. So I'm really indifferent to my call here. I think it's super unclear. I think it's fine. I'm not excited about it. Let's play some more. Ace 4 here. We're going to alternate between 3-bet and call. I'm going to go 70% 3-bet, 30% call here. I do build a calling range against the first 2 positions from the small blind. I think it's quite important to do that. Not that important. I think you can get away with playing 3-bet or fold here, but it's definitely... There's more EV in building a calling range here than there would be against later positions. And that's because you limit how many hands you can play here by playing 3-bet or fold. If you're playing 3-bet only, then you have to start folding hands like pocket 8s that you would never have to fold if you're building a calling range. Obviously we are doing nothing here, we're getting out here. You don't normally want to defend a lot of these offsuit aces in the big blind, but against a recreational player with an assumed skill edge against a very small sizing, you definitely do want to defend. And on the ace turn, we're going to be checking again. We're leading extremely polarized here, much more polarized than this hand. We'd rather just play this as a check call. But on the river, I think the right sizing for the hand is something like b75. Over on the other table, we open king 9 and we get a flop that we're just going to be betting range with 1/3 pot on, and we take it down. Another classic spot where we want to scan the table. We have one guy tagged as recreational, another guy that may be recreational. This king 9 should be exactly break even, but we're going to go ahead and open it every time because we know the 9 is coming on the flop, boys and girls. We make the 9. In this spot, I'm going to do some checking, do some betting generally. I'm going to just pure bet here. I have this player tagged as... Actually, this may be a regular. I think this tag might be wrong. Yeah, I'm going to just mix this. So globally, my range will bet about 40% of the time here for a big bet. This hand will bet about 70, 65. I roll a bet this time, I bet. I will check this back occasionally. I don't think ace 9 or king 9 have particularly high check frequencies here, but they will check sometimes. Something like Queen 9 or Jack 9 will check a lot more than Ace 9 or King 9, I believe, because they're just weaker hands. On the 10 turn, we're going to be playing a B75 strategy. I think this hand is still good enough to value bet, but I'm going to mix it 50-50. I think it can bet again and then check back river, or it can check now and then bet river facing another check. And against a quick call here in a club run out with a very easy check back, and villain had got there with the flush. What can you do? Here we open King Queen of Hearts in the hijack. Plenty of weaker players tagged here. Flop a flush, which is always nice. I'm going to start off with a check here with absolutely everything. Not going to be deviating for playing against this recreational here. Unfortunately, when he checks back here, his range is going to be fairly weak. That said, I think betting, the EV of betting surpasses checking here. I'm going to go for a slight overbet here, and my rationale is that he's going to have a lot of pair plus draw, Jack X now. I think his calling range will be largely quite inelastic, and we're going to go for the same reason, we're going to go for a very large bet on the river as well. I'm just going to go ahead and overbet here with the flush. And this hand we have Queen 10, blind versus blind. We do a little trace of 3-bet here with this hand as a bluff. It's mostly just going to be call though. I think there's a sliver, as my friend Sam likes to say, of 3-bet. Villain goes ahead and third pots the flop. We can assume he's doing this with range when he just instantly does this. And in this situation, we're going to be mixing call and raise. I'm going to call this time, but I will have a relatively high raise frequency with this hand, upwards of 60% for sure. When villain checks here, we are just going to be playing a B75. With the Queen of Spades in my hand, I get check raised a lot less frequently, and I think we can pure bet this one. With a random Queen 10 that didn't have a flush draw blocker, I would actually be mixing some check. People get this a little bit backwards. It's actually not good to unblock your opponent's draws on a node like this because they generally call you or raise you, and you have Queen High at the end of the day, right? You have a bluff here, so it's a little bit dicey. Our hand does get to call a raise, usually, if it's not a huge raise, but that doesn't mean that we welcome that branch of the tree happening where we face a raise. So I hope you guys enjoy the format of mixing in a little bit of analysis with some play. If you are enjoying the format, definitely do head on over to carrotcorner.com and see what else we have to offer there. In this hand, we've opened cutoff. We've got a call by the big blind. King Jack 9, this is a board that's really good for range. We're going to be doing a lot of betting, but it will be small betting. And on the turn, I think we have a pure bet again here on blocking the king, but it's just going to be B75 with this part of my range. I'm not going to be overbetting this texture. I could overbet this texture, I'm just not going to bother building it here. I don't think it's as important to build it in spots like this where your opponent has a lot of really high EV calls like 2-pair and stuff like that in his range, and some straights that are meant to slow play. We get practically the worst river imaginable. Very easy check back with bottom 2 here, and we're just hoping to run into something like King 5, King 6. One time dealer, no, the 2-pair. That's one reason why I don't like overbetting the turn. We just have a lot of hands like that, even some straight slow plays in villain's range. Although a straight should usually raise on the flop, I don't think it always does. Straights are a little bit tricky in equilibrium. Open up 5s in the hijack here, guys. And on the other table, we have ace queen. Weaker player, I think, min raises. Got the pink tag here, which is generally a looser weaker player. The HUD seems to confirm that so far. With 5s, we've flopped absolutely nothing into 2 recreationals. We're going to check and perhaps bluff later. We just want to let them define their ranges a little bit here. They're going to play the spot quite transparently. That's going to be a very easy fold now. Back over here, and we're going to make our 3-bet size not too big, not too small, 6, 7, anything like that's totally fine. We'd expect this sort of player type, usually if I'm right about the player type, to over-defend a little bit to 3-bets, probably under 4-bet. That said, I think we still call a 4-bet here. This player's not playing like a completely recreational style of game. He's playing like a really loose regular. So Queen 10-9 is an okay flop for a range. It's not actually as good as you would think. Queens, 10s, 9s, King Jack suited, these are all parts of his range. I don't think this is one we range bet on. I will bet at high frequency with range here, let's say something like 70% of the time, and with hand I will bet about that too, maybe 75% of the time. I have rolled a check this time, so I'm going to check back. If I'm not range betting, I will always roll top pair into a checking range at some frequency on a board like this, because it's just not a mandatory value bet. It's not a mighty hand. Very good turn card for our hand here. 9x is obviously not a big part of villain's range. When you get the second check here from a recreational player, you typically get the green light, and one thing you can do is build some very big bets on this node. We can definitely go for an overbet here. We can go for a pot size bet. I think I'm going to make my sizing on this node just a slight overbet and be betting good Queen X plus in bluffs in this spot, polarizing my range out like that. King Queen off here. This is one of these hands you can mix cold 4-bet with. I don't mind it. I think against an unknown player here, we can just roll this one. I'll go for 33% cold 4-bet here. I think it's fine. Only in those positions though. And on this table, we have ace queen. Unfortunately, the positions are just a little bit too tight. This is not a cold 4-bet spot because the key difference here is that hijack opened, not button. So it might look weird to consider cold 4-betting king queen but not ace queen. Then we get ace queen again. Let's open it. It called by big blind. Extremely high EV flop for range, one that we're just not going to think on. We're going to bet 1/3 because we're doing that with everything. I don't care if he knows that. Ace queen on the 7 turn, a little bit too high up. I don't think this one bluffs. I think you're going to be bluffing ace 5, ace 9, ace 6, and then like queen jack jack 10, 10-9 combos. club hands, maybe some pocket threes, pocket fours, stuff like this. I think ace queen is just going to play as check here. It's a little bit too mediocre. It's actually a better hand than threes and fours because it's more live, essentially. On the river though, this is a very good run out for range. I'm just trying to decide how high up I want to bluff here. We shouldn't be winning very often on this node now, and we are under the gun, which means we need to bluff a lot further down than normal. We do have ace-jack combos available. This one I think is close. I might take a look at this one in the solver. I'm going to guess that ace-queen is still a check, but something like ace-jack starts to be a bet here. I think that's probably where the inflection point is, ace-10 of hearts. I also think that node, that part of the game tree, might be a little bit underfolded. Let's take one look at that before we wrap up for today. So in this spot, we have villain checking the flop, us range betting absolutely everything here. Villain calls, we get the 7 of clubs turn, it goes check, and then with ace queen here, it's kind of interesting. Some of the combos can start bluffing. This isn't quite a pure bluff because we do have the ace over card and the queen is a good second pair draw against many of villain's turn calls as well. Don't want to forget about that, right? That is actually live. This time we check back as we usually should with ace queen. You can see we're normally just checking here. 10 of spades comes in the river, villain checks, and then I was actually right for once. It's always good when I'm right. Usually the solver just gives me a slap in the wrist and sends me to think about what I've done, but this time we do actually start bluffing with ace-jack. We don't use overbets on this particular betting opportunity because we check back turn, thus capping our range a bit, but we do use this b75 sizing a lot. We can do that with ace-jack. It's kind of optional depending on suits. Ace-queen, we can't do that, and of course if we get here with a lower down hand like queen jack or something, we have to bluff. I thought there would be a bit of bluffing with something like ace-6, ace-3, and there is some, so these are optional. Then when we get down to the sort of jack high hands, it becomes, aren't really any jack high here, but like queen high, it becomes mandatory to bluff. So interesting. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you very soon for another video. This has been P Clark at Carrot Corner, and yeah, good luck at the tables. Take it easy. Bye for now.